Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Sherman Antitrust Act. And you'll kind of notice from my style of teaching, some of you will not like this, and some of you will really like it. Um, it's very typical that when you take a history class, that you are required to memorize something like this, and we have to break it down. And in my opinion, what ends up happening is you walk away, regardless of whether you had an A or an F, you don't think about the Sherman Antitrust Act, and you're not walking away utilizing that as a way to conceptualize the time period we're talking about. Unless you're somebody who's really passionately into the topic, and you're going to do that on your own or you're not, right? I have a friend who's a lawyer. Obviously, he tries, his brain works in a way that, like, if you're going to make a debate about something, an argument, you need to have these kind of facts down and establish them. And in my field, in my profession as well, especially if you are going to have a debate or a discussion, writing a paper and so forth. Oh, excuse me. But I feel like this often just kind of goes over your head. So I don't focus on a lot of these bold black terms that are often, the catchphrase things that you're supposed to be drawing attention to. For this reason, I want you to get the essence of what's going on. To me, this is a general education course. And if you have questions about any of these things and you want more detail, I know I say this over and over again, but I really want you to call up and ask me. If I was in a classroom, you'd be able to raise your hand and get more clarification on things when a topic is coming up and maybe I'm brushing over something that you want to talk about, okay? So let me just make that clear. So essentially, what we've been talking about is a time period where you have these rich, very powerful, wealthy industrialists who are having a lot of power and control in the country. It's a debate that we feel even now, right? That many Americans are often uncomfortable with feeling like that we're a country ran by elites when we're supposed to be a democratic republic. And that debate has literally always been going on in this country. But the circumstances have been different at times. The Sherman Antitrust Act is basically to essentially make the trusts illegal. The business practices. Here's what I want you to know. The government did have pressure to try to regulate business, and they were coming up with things to kind of prove that they actually were cracking down. But by the time that they actually got this Sherman Antitrust Act put together, it essentially had no teeth. It was a law set up that could be easily bypassed. And then Rockefeller, seeing what was going on, kind of just rearranged his whole business practices to get around all this, so that the power and the corruption that were coming out of the business world was simply maintained. And think about all the controversy we have now about the role of finance and elections, and and I mean, in this election now, the controversy over super PACs, or is a politician being bought off or not, or whatever. And so the sentiment was people feeling something like this, which maybe some of us feel like today, that within the Senate here we have monopolists, right? What is monopolist? Somebody who has an entire, owns an entire industry. Or just a few people owning the most of business, or a particular type of business. And so here, this picture, you probably saw this in high school. I did. That they've been using this picture for a long time to illustrate this period. Like if you look up here at the top, people's interest closed. And then who looms large and dominates? Copper industry, steel, Standard Oil, Rockefeller's stuff, the iron, sugar, tin, coal. You get the point. And the feeling was that basically business was running the country. Governance was in the interests of private investors at the expense of the majority. That was one group of looking at it. And, I need to always kind of bring in both sides of the argument. Again, to this day, people who are very industrialists would say, look, this was an unfair criticism. Remember that this country was made great because of these men. Well, again, I'll let you decide that. What I thought I would do, though, is, and this may come later in the textbook as well, but I think right now would be a good time to get a grip on some words and terms of ideologies that were in confrontation with the economic system that we are talking about and the circumstances that we are talking about in several of these chapters. And I'm going to have you watch a little documentary on the Haymarket Affair, or Haymarket Riot as it was called. And you'll see in the documentary that one of the historians talks about how in the newspaper, when there was any kind of labor agitation, workers rising up under a political ideology, they were often just called anarchists, because that's of course also the worst word. It's kind of like saying terrorist or something. And so a lot of times they were inaccurate, but anarchism still is a political ideology, a concept that people actually live by. So in popular culture, it means chaos, and that's the term that I think the newspapers and the business class wanted the average worker to envision what anarchism would mean. It's a little bit more complex than that. And as I mentioned to you, that socialism had communism was much more popular at the time than a lot of people realize nowadays. And we have a situation now where Bernie Sanders, wherever he's going, and I have to bring him up again just because he talks about being a democratic socialist, and he is comfortable with the term socialism. In my lifetime, and I think maybe we will look later at a man named Debs. We had one other example of a popular socialist, but I believe he was in jail much of the time. Basically, it's just understood that in U.S. politics, you don't talk about socialism. It's very much the taboo. And Obama has been called a socialist by his critics. Basically, especially from the Republican Party, when you say somebody's a socialist, you are not giving them a compliment. Now, those of you who did not grow up in the Cold War barely have even heard these terms until recently, or you're not really familiar with them. So I'm going to try to make a quick breakdown of these terms, and I promise you, if you can get a grip on these terms, you'll be 20 million times more intelligent than the average person talking about politics. So I put down that these are all socialists, okay? And there's different branches of socialism. And there's different debates about what is real socialism. It's just like Christianity. When people say, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Christian. And then you get a Baptist or evangelical, and they say, no. Christians don't do, the Catholics did it. And all of a sudden there's a religious debate. Jehovah's Witnesses say they're Christian. Catholics and other groups say they're not Christian. So anytime you have an ism, you will have various branches of people debating about what that ism specifically is. So that confusion goes with everything. What's real Islam? What's real Christianity? What's real democracy? Blah, 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 right? Okay. But there are certain points that we can agree on. Socialism, coming from the same word of being social, is when the workers, one meaning is when the workers take direct control of the means of production outside of the bosses or the capitalist class. And the other definition of socialism would be when the state takes over the thing in the name, an industry in the name of public interest, or when you say that the public sector. Okay, so Modesto Junior College is a socialist institution if what we mean is when the state is running this industry, and like my checks come from taxpayers, not a private employer. That's different for, let's say, University of Phoenix or other private universities, right? Okay, that's part of capitalism. So it's in the private sector. So capitalism dealing with the private sector. Someone personally owns something and has workers underneath them. Socialism has to do with a collectively owned industry in the name of the people, rather directly or indirectly through the state. Okay, and so then that would mean then that even the police force, despite the fact that police have often been at odds, and historically you'll see that with the Haymarket riots, at odds with labor demonstrations, at this point now, the police being publicly owned, you could actually argue that the police department is a socialist institution. A lot of people, I have relatives who get upset when I say that, but if you're really going to take a look at the definition, the military, police department, fire department, public schools, these are all a part, at least in the United States, these would be really socialist institutions, okay? I'm going to end here, and I'm going to continue this discussion in the next lecture.